Hello, everyone. A very, very warm welcome to today's webinar session. Delighted that you're able to join us. I can see that there are still more people who are joining us as I speak. If we can just start with the first slide and just focus really on the content of the theme of today's webinar, living with loss, writing for bereavement, for work and career. I'm Deirdre Hughes and I'm the Director of DMH Associates. Apologies if I sound a bit croaky today, that's because I am. So I'm not going to talk too much. I'm actually going to leave you in the very capable hands of our two guest speakers. I'm really delighted to introduce Associate Professor Reinekke Lengelle from Canada. And Reinika is going to actually share with us her own personal experience in relation to the topic, but actually to give us some practical hints and tips around how we can actually not only look after ourselves, but support the learning of others, as indeed is Russ Banner. Russ is Director of Career Guidance Charts, and I'm really grateful to Russ, who as a result of coming to one of our webinars, kindly stepped up and offered to sponsor this. So thank you very much, Russ, for that. Let's just look at the next slide and just remind ourselves really on the focus of today's session. And I'm not going to read out all the words because you will have read them already, and that's really why you're here. But it's just a reminder to us really on what today's webinar is all about. And I want it to begin really with a heartfelt acknowledgement to the people of Ukraine who are living with loss in their everyday lives. And indeed, having not only to think about bereavement for work and career, but also bereavement at so many other levels. So in this particular session, it may well be that you're sort of thinking about how to support others who have experienced loss, or you may yourself be experiencing loss and you want to really get comfort and also learn more from other colleagues. And in just a few minutes, we'll have a little short poll so we can see what everybody's expectations of today's webinar are. But I just wanted to really acknowledge here that I'm hoping that we've got something for everyone in this session. You may wish to reflect. You may wish to add questions as part of the conversation. The question and answer facility is at the bottom of your screen. Just pop a question in as we go along if anything springs to mind. And most importantly, let's use the chat facility to say hello. So tell us if you haven't done so already, where in the world are you? We've had over 100 people express an interest in this particular webinar. If they're not with us in person today, they'll be watching the recording tomorrow. But we have people from all around the world, as far away as New Zealand, India, Canada, the UK, and indeed everywhere else in between. So I just wanted to start off with a light-hearted sort of thought, a little quiz, really. Great to see we've got colleagues from mid-Welsh coast here and others. I can see some of the chat as we go along. So as a little icebreaker to get you warmed up, maybe you may have seen this before, but when we were in the height of the pandemic, kind Canadians started a trend. So can you tell me, use the chat facility, what was the trend that the kind Canadians set? And Randika, you're not allowed to give us the answer to that. I can see we've got colleagues from Alberta here, all over the world. It's so wonderful. Colleagues from England. So there's no right and wrong answers. It's just a bit fun. So tell me, can anyone guess, what did the kind Canadians really start that was a trend? Give you just a minute and you can guess any sorts of things that you think they might have had when they were sort of coping with the loss of our everyday normal lives, as it were. Just looking to see if we've got any comments. I'm not going to put Russ on the spot because we haven't rehearsed this, have we, Russ? So shall I? Ross is saying, no idea. Thank you for your honesty. That's one of the golden rules of today, is that there's no right and wrong answers, that we want to be honest and we want to create a really good environment where we all feel safe. Sally says kindness. And Stephen says no idea either, but we have to give it to Anu in Mumbai. You're absolutely right. Let's go to the next slide. Caremongering. And I thought this was just a wonderful way of us reminding ourselves that in the context of living with loss, we have to care not just for the people that we are concerned about, but we have to care for our own emotional and physical well-being as well. So let's now just go into the first poll of the webinar. And we just would like you to very quickly think about what do you hope to learn about in this session today? And we've given you just some examples here. The practical ways to look after your own issues, others' personal loss, having access to resources. Maybe it's confidence in terms of dealing with loss and how to support others. And if there's nothing in there that speaks to you about why you've come today, just pop it into the chat facility. And that will help both Reinika, Ross, and indeed myself to make sure that by the end of this session, given that we've got an hour and a half together, that you actually get something out of this as a takeaway that really, really helps you in terms of your everyday life and your work. So just give you another second or two to fill out the poll, and then we'll have a look at the results. Mark, when you're ready, maybe you could just share the results with us all. So Mark, are these our final results that we're looking at? Can everyone see? Yeah. Reinekke's nodding her head, so we're going to assume that these are our final results. So there's a little bit of mixture in there, isn't there, in terms of what colleagues would like to get out of this. But we can see that it's all about us basically using the time now wisely to allow us to sort of think about this very, very important topic. And so it's my great pleasure now to introduce Russ to you. Formerly known as Russell, but I call him Russ. I hope that's okay, Russ. And Russ, over to you in terms of this topic, living with loss, and tell us your personal story. And remember, folks, please use the question facility and the chat as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. Can I use my slides? Is that possible, Mark? I can do that. Are you able to see me there?
Yes, that's possible, Russ. So if you just share that'll be fine.
That's great. I've made a few minor changes from the beginning. That's it. Can you all see that? That'd be great. Can you all see that? Lovely. Thank you, Deirdre, for your time. It's been a pleasure to be with you today. So this is a little bit of my journey, my story, and I just want to say, to caveat everything that says this is my personal experience and this might not be yours. And I hope from the things that I talk about today that you'll find some helpful tips, some resources, some ideas, some approaches. So a little bit about my own company. I run a career resource business, been in the industry for about 15 years. I also work for a housing association, so that's in the UK, a council or a large property owner that is a not-for-profit business, and they support people looking for work. I've also worked in adult careers and with young people as well. And Millie, who's my marketing assistant, is somewhere here today, hopefully, watching the presentation. So I'm going to spend about 20 minutes with us all together. And this is sort of the overview of what I hope to do, is to really talk about my own personal story connected with the theme today, offer some of my own experiences and reflections, and then explore the connection between bereavement and career direction in a very broad sense for you to sort of, for consideration and reflection. And I've got a couple of particular questions that I'd like to raise as part of that. So my story began in 2018 with the birth of my daughter, Connie. Connie had a congenital heart condition, which for those of you that don't understand, that basically means that her left side of her heart wasn't functioning fully well. And we discovered that at a 20-week scan, so quite early on in my wife's pregnancy. And it meant that life became particularly challenging with our daughter. And this is a picture of her when she was born. And then the top picture there is one of these sort of transport devices that the hospital made available when she was born, to move her to the Evelina Hospital, which is a London hospital that specialises in care for children with her condition. She was there for 3 weeks, seemed to be doing well, and then there was a real sense from the medical team there that Connie would need surgery. And so at 3 weeks, she had a chest surgery, effectively what you'd call as a sort of a plumbing exercise, just making sure that her heart would function as best as possible, considering the constraints that she was under. This picture on the right, this is with my son Henry and my daughter at 6 weeks, having returned back home. Life at home was one of what you might call, I think you say, describe it as fairly normal life. I think most people, if you look at the pictures, wouldn't think that you would looking at a child here who's had major surgery. But there were regular occurrences of, we had to give her iron supplements to sustain her oxygen levels, regular monthly trips to the hospital for checkups. We had an oxygen machine that would do effectively an oxygen check on her body, and which we did twice a day, and we had to do regular weight checks, as I said earlier. And we had a couple of minor emergencies just when she caught colds that needed some intervention, but life was pretty normal for her, and I think that was a real privilege for us as a family to be able to have her at home. Her medical prognosis was that she really had very much a life-limiting condition. She would need surgery to sustain her, and most likely she would need a transplant, although they can't find too much at the early stages. Reality of life at home was literally she was being fed every 2 hours. Such was her needs that she just needed regular milk feeds, and that went on for most part of her life. And she wasn't really crawling or walking, so her development was limited due to the challenges of her heart. We opted to have surgery in August 2020 as really an intention to try and extend her life as best as possible, to see if we could do some repair on her heart. So she had heart surgery. And as a couple, it was really a decision of hope to sustain her to a place where we hope she might have a transplant. With all things in hospital life, there are complications, and I don't know if you've ever had family or members of family who've been in hospital, you probably understand the sort of roller coaster of existence that sometimes happens, and that was very much our experience. The surgery went well, but she had perfusion issues in her lower body that caused some problems with her gut, dying, some infections, kidneys not working. She went to dialysis, then she came off dialysis. It was really a roller coaster of experience for us as a family. Unfortunately, Connie got to November and passed away. It was a hard journey for us, and we were very much advised by the hospital that we were looking at palliative care for her. And in some respects, this was kind of, I'd call a godsend, that actually she kind of, life ended very quickly for her, and I won't go into the detail, but it just meant that we didn't have to make some really hard decisions about how life would go on. I take this picture on the right because the nurses called it Connie's Corner, because Connie pretty much had taken up a great view at the Evelina Hospital on the 6th floor, which overlooks London, and this was kind of her place. And obviously for me as a father, returning to the ward after she passed away, there was a real poignant moment of seeing her corner and not seeing her there. So that was our story, and I guess I just wanted to share some reflections on bereavement and loss from that story. And I think the one thing that I want to say, and again, I caveat this by my own experience, is that we try to do death well. My wife and I have a Christian faith, and that was really important to us. So there was a lot of things about Connie's passing that we felt that we were able to do well. And I know that people listening today will say, well, actually, that wasn't my experience, and you know, I can't really comment on what you've been through, but these were some of the things that we were able to be in control of, if that makes sense, about our own experience. So we were able to choose the day and the time of her passing. We were able to spend that time there was in faith and worship. We had a WhatsApp video with a family who were able to say their goodbyes. I know that's not everyone's experience, but we were in lockdown, so they couldn't be present. We had some significant people important to us, like our chaplain and our consultant who journeyed with us most of the time. We were very fortunate to have two of the best nurses at the hospital, the paediatric nurses that were available to be part of the team on that day. We had a very quiet day on the ward, unusually. Paediatric wards get really busy, and we were really, really thankful that actually on that particular day, there wasn't really many children coming in and out. They say that lockdown meant that lots of children didn't get respiratory problems, so we weren't going to hospital. And then we had this a funeral impacted by COVID because we couldn't have lots of people present, but we had just an immediate members of family that were able to be there. On the night of her passing, we had a family friend who's a songwriter write a song for us, and Reinika will talk about writing for bereavement, but this is kind of another angle, is the ability for music to impact your life in terms of going through the bereavement process. And I wanted to share it here because of the profound impact it had for me as a father, that we were able to have this song that had so much comfort to us. And I'm just going to pause for a minute, because I know I've talked quite quickly, just to let you just read the words of the song that's called Rest Now. So the song was a sort of play on Connie. Obviously her name Connie comes from the word Constance, and it was a real comfort to us as a piece of music. And you can just go to YouTube and just search Connie Legacy video, and you'll see it there. My experience of handling grief, I kind of put 6 things that were significant to us. Faith and hope, the Christian perspective of life is there's death and there's the afterlife, resurrection. That was a significant foundation for us, that she's not here, but we know where she's gone to. Tragic, but not tragedy. My daughter's passing was tragic in the sense that her life wasn't sustained, but not necessarily as a tragedy in the way that some might feel that life was cut short, but actually she had her life, she had limited conditions, and we were able to appreciate her for who she was and for the life that she gave. Very much so that grief can end, but loss doesn't. And this is something that's quite important to me, that you do process grief in different ways, but the loss, doesn't go away. The loss of a loved one doesn't go away. And I know that's kind of an obvious thing to say, but that loss remains, but maybe the grief and the emotional side of it does fade over time. Moments and milestones, just there are moments in terms of going through grief, and there's clear significant milestones, a bit like birthdays, where there are times of remembrance. I was very fortunate to be able to access some counselling from the hospital, and that was really significant for me to be able to process some of the grief. It's perhaps a cliche to say that time can heal, And when you're in the midst of grief, it's probably not necessarily a helpful thing to be told, but time can heal. And I do mean it can, depending on how one's adjust to the process. Bereavement for me personally, I wanted to, how has the loss changed me was my question I raised. I think I value life more and those around me. I feel that maybe I'm more empathetic towards those who've experienced bereavement and loss. I certainly, as a careers professional, I've had moments in which I've been able to empathize with a client by sharing very, very briefly about my own experience of loss. I think my faith has deepened, although, as I said here, might not have all answers. And certainly there's been an initiation within me for some sort of change. So this is me abseiling down the side of the Evelina Hospital where my daughter was, raising funds for the hospital for the various medical work that goes on. It was a team of 6 of us raised about £7,000. So it was really a significant day, and it was just amazing support we got from that. Some thoughts on the impact of grief on career development. Again, these are just my considerations. I think people's values can change, what I call a paradigm shift, that people go through a change of value, what's truly important to them in their life. And that can impact whether their work currently becomes meaningful or less meaningful. People can be demotivated and disinterested in work. And they can want change that can either be desirous to try and gain control of life, or escapism of grief, or energizing towards maybe a new mission or vocational focus. And I think the career counsellor can have a really significant role in that, helping people to explore both the change and its meaning. And so I have a couple of questions at this point I just want to raise. Firstly, what career approaches, if you come from a career guidance background, what career approaches have you used or would you use to support an individual contemplating career change as a result of bereavement? Are there particular approaches that you might use to support those that are coming to you that from a bereavement context who want to look at their career and their future? So that's the first question. Perhaps, Deirdre, we can look at that maybe later if we have time.
Yeah, absolutely, Russ. I think that would be terrific. And remember that our webinars are always about sharing ideas. Yeah. So colleagues, use that chat facility around a response to that question. And I know Ross is going to pose maybe another question full of lots as well. So, okay, yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. And the second question is there a perfect time when career contemplation should begin whilst an individual is in the grief and loss process? Now, there are many different theories of grief and loss. The Kubler-Ross change is probably a very well-known one about the shock and denial, frustration, depression, that people go through at different times in different ways, that, their process of going through grief. And Worden has ones about task of mourning. So there are some sort of stages that people can go through or process, or people mix and match through those processes. So is there a perfect time? When people are approaching career counselling and saying, I've been through this, I want to talk about it. Does that support the grieving process to actually be able to talk about their career? Again, that's a question I think I'd like to raise. Another way to look at grief is to think about how sometimes it impacts on people's life in terms of their changes. Some people do find that they want to do something different. Others, maybe there's a new interest or hobby or project that can or may not be aligned to their current career. And my experience, what I will just talk a few minutes now, is about what I call my second runway. This is Dallas International Airport. And, not planned, not intentional. And certainly if you'd spoken to me a few years ago, Russ, would you go and do this? I'd said, no. I'm a careers advisor. This is not what I do. Yes, I run a business, but it's not something that I got involved with. But actually, I found an aligned new direction, a new project as a result of my own journey with the loss of my daughter. And I just wanted to raise it as a context of hope, as someone who's been through bereavement. So currently in Pune in India, I've been developing a paediatric cot chair that's designed to support children who are effectively in long-term intensive care that need to have some time of respite and play. So it's a chair that's designed to support these sorts of children. And my goal is to try and raise the money to make these sorts of chairs available in hospital for free in paediatric wards, that children can have this playtime. One of the things my daughter couldn't do very easily was able to sit up with all the cables and lines and the ventilator. She would have some short quality time while she was in a cot bed. Often you had to be removed from the cot bed into a high chair, and that was extremely hard to do. It took a long time, it was very stressful. And I just saw an opportunity, said maybe I could improve a child's life in some way. So this is a kind of a project that I've begun. I guess the question is, Russ, why? And I would say I saw a need and an opportunity. I felt there was some hope for others from my own dark experience. If you think of darkness in terms of loss, a sense of legacy for my daughter, and some sense of meaning from my own journey, whilst recognizing that this project wouldn't necessarily, change the grieving process. Is it therapeutic for me? It is in some ways, and in some ways it's not. But certainly I feel as if I can make a difference and a change to other children's life. And if you look at many charities and stories of other people that have dealt with grief in some respects, there's often, there is a drive that comes out of it that comes from somewhere that wants to bring change and hope and betterment for other people's lives. I leave you with this. Every year on Connie's birthday, we've made a tradition. Again, this is part of my remembrance process to light a firework for each of her birth years. And just gone, we celebrated her third, so we lit 3 fireworks. And that analogy of the really fast rocket that goes up and explodes really suddenly does feel like the kind of legacy of what Connie's life has done for us and how it's impacted us. And that's the end of my reflections today. So I left with a couple of questions there for people to look over. Deirdre, over to you, I think.
Thank you very much, Ross. And it's such a moving story, and it's got so many dimensions to it in terms of what you've just shared. And I think for many of our audience, we can see already little signs of excellence, and a thank you in the chat facility. But actually sort of linking it to career development and work, when we think about adults or young people who present themselves to us, it's really, really important that we can actually draw on as many experiences as possible. And what I love about what you've just done, Ross, is you've also sort of given us a bit of theory that sometimes we can draw on, and in the chat facility, I've just put in a link to a theory that someone else had suggested as well. But also, you've now got this sort of new business as well that's come out of it, which is
I would say yes. I would say it's surprising. I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to get onto Radio 5 Live, because there was a conversation on the BBC radio about products that have made a difference in the world, and I just said I'm trying to make a difference in just a few children's lives, because obviously this product is really specific for a certain number of children, and they just, it's amazing that you're doing this. But as a parent, it's just you want to do something to help others, and 2 years ago or 3 years ago, it wouldn't have crossed my mind. It wasn't something I'd want to do. It's something I needed to do. But then this is the nature of sometimes the outworking of grief. Sometimes is that it does lend to do things that you are maybe so personally surprised by.
Absolutely. Well, that legacy is there, and you're a radio star as well. Who would have thought it, hey? Well, thank you. And I think it's great just to see in the chat how people have been very moved, by your story. And we're going to hear some more from you, Russ, towards the end of the webinar. So let's actually now move on to our next speaker, Reinika Lengelle. And Reinika said to me in the rehearsal, Deirdre, make sure you tell everyone, have a pen and a piece of paper ready. No, sorry, I should have said it earlier, but I've done it now, Reinika. But I think what Reinika's hoping is that she can have some interaction with you and give you a bit of space now as well to have some personal reflection. So over to you, Reinika. It's such a delight to have you, a great honor to have you and Russ on this webinar together.
Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you, Russ, for your story. And I'm hailing from Edmonton, and we affectionately call Edmonton Edmonchuk as well, because there's so many Ukrainians here, and I just want to acknowledge that as well. So I'm just going to switch to my screen sharing so that I can open the webinar. Here we go. I'm hoping everyone can see it. Deirdre, you can let me know if anything is awry, or Mark. Okay, so here's the title again. And I'm a professor at Athabasca University in Canada, and I'm a researcher at the Hague University. I'm part of a research group there. So before I begin my story and to invite you to do some writing, we're going to do a little bit of writing into experience. I just want to say something about death losses and non-death losses. You know, it's although my story is going to be about a death loss, there are so many losses that we've experienced, in particular in COVID, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about what young people have lost, because I know there are career guidance counselors here too, and I just wanted to read you from an article by 4 Italian colleagues from Padua. The article is called "In the Same Boat," an online group career counseling with a group of young adults in the time of COVID. You know, in 2020, and this, of course, this is already an older statistic, shows an increase in youth unemployment rate of 16.8%, with Italy, Sweden, Spain, and Greece exceeding 27%. So the findings from the global survey on youth and COVID-19, involving over 12,000 respondents from 112 countries between April and May 2020. Again, this is an older statistic already, revealed that 17.4% of young adults aged 18 to 29 years around the world have stopped working since the onset of the crisis. And young adults constitute the principal victims of the pandemic social and economic consequences. So I just want to speak to that, as the school to work transitions will be affected by that as well. So the principle of my talk today is to invite you to do some exploring for yourself, because as we get more comfortable with grief and some of our own losses, we're actually able to help others better. So the invitation is to spend some time on you, which seems like a selfish thing, but when you're in care provision of any sort, whether it's career counseling or other care, it's important that you are able to ground yourself and be with your own losses. And that's how we can make safe space for other people to feel like they can be with theirs. So this is a dear colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Robert Niemeyer, who beautifully says, we are wired for attachment in a world of impermanence. We're attached to all sorts of things, not only people, but also to our jobs, our identities, and all of that. So loss is going to inevitably be part of our lives. The Yorkshire poet David White says, we could do well to apprentice ourselves more to loss and actually learn more how to deal with loss, and even embrace it as a learning process. This is my love for Frans Meyers. He died in 2018 in November, after we'd been together for 10 years and had known each other and loved each other for much longer even. And my boss in the Netherlands, my supervisor of the research group, she said, I thought maybe you'd need 6 months off and wouldn't be able to work. She said, I was really amazed that you were able to work. Now, this is a very compassionate person, obviously, to say that to me, even though our work environments often are different. What did I do instead? I spent 7 months while Frans was ill with cancer. And after he passed, I wrote about loss for a year. So here's a picture of Franz and myself. So, and my boss, what she said. Thanks for letting me know, Mark. So I wrote for a year about loss. And I started my tenure track job 6 weeks after his death, which is actually something that Franz really wanted. He wanted his daughters and me as well, and all his beloveds to go on with life. He says, life goes on. And he says, and life is for the living. And he invited us to feel guilt-free in that. And I found that a great gift because he really gave us permission to continue on and to even enjoy life and not only be sad and loyal to him in that sadness. 1 in 5 people is grieving the loss of a loved one at any given time. And loss costs us billions each year. There's statistics out of the United States that in 2003, $75 billion was already lost on grief. Now, just imagine how much that would be now, considering the pandemic, where 1 million Americans have lost their lives to the COVID. So, but we still believe that grief and work are separate domains. And I hope from this presentation, if you get one thing from it, is that those are not separate domains. So how about you? So I'm going to invite you just to take a minute to write down a question that is alive for you about grief. So I like to play a little and say, what if a book of answers came from the sky? What would you ask? What would you ask? So just write it down and let the pen do a little work for you. So I'm going to also write with you. So imagine that you were able to have a question answered for yourself that was really important to you. We'll work with this a little later, and I won't ask you to share the question. You don't have to share it, but just to write it down. And maybe you've had a recent loss. Maybe you've lost a pet, even, or you've lost connection with someone. Okay. So, and the beat poets always said, first thought, best thought. So if you feel that it's not easy to come up with a question, just allow yourself to think that question that is actually emerging, Just see if you can listen for it. Okay. So I'm assuming everyone has written down their question, and we will revisit this later, so no need to think about that for the moment. We will revisit. Okay. Grief and loss affect our sleep, our eating habits, our routines, and our well-being overall. They disrupt our assumptive world. Our assumptive world, this is the term that Robert Niemeyer uses, he says, is that life is good, and that if you are a good person, then good things will happen to you. And we're always surprised then, in a sense, that things happen that are unjust and painful. They confront us with identity change and secondary losses. So often, actually, when we lose someone, or we lose a job, or we lose an opportunity, we also lose other things along the way. That's something that we don't always consider. Like when Franz died, I lost my home in the Netherlands. You know, we had a home there, and I lost that. But I also lost contact with some of his friends and family members over the years, because there's that same glue that held us together didn't hold, because he fell away, that didn't hold us together anymore. So you have more losses than you realize when you have a change of life, whether it's, like I say, a death loss or a non-death loss, divorce or a job loss. Loss also brings often unfinished business with it. So it has additional difficulties, not just the actual loss, but also the unfinished business that is associated with it. And it takes time and space to heal, as Russ was saying. It takes time, and time does make grief somehow less acute, depending on how, as Russ said, depending on how we deal with it. It's not a given that time heals, but it certainly often makes grief less acute. These are 3 of the ways that grief and work intersect. Now, there are many ways. When I was preparing this presentation, I was discussing with a career psychologist colleague of mine, Tom Luke in the Netherlands. He said, there are so many ways in which grief and work intersect, and we were speaking about this. So we have trouble working as our concentration, mood, and health are affected by loss. The work we do may no longer feel meaningful, as Russ also was saying. We may actually feel that things that we thought were meaningful and that we identified with just don't have the same meaning anymore. Our place of work may not feel as safe as it did before. Now, I was very fortunate with both my workplaces because my colleagues were very compassionate, but there are moments when you don't feel that you want to be vulnerable at work, because somehow you feel that if you're vulnerable at work, it affects how you are seen as a professional. And I think that that's something that we really have to name. Talking about loss at work is usually not done. Others frequently tell us to move on, or at work we may feel that we have to hold it all together. So the compounded issue here is grief and work intersect in myriad ways, but we pretend they are separate life domains. Our society is grief illiterate. There's ongoing stigma in speaking vulnerably in the workplace. Now, think about this. Our society is grief illiterate. And you think, well, how is that true? Well, just imagine, after losing France, I noticed that when other people had losses and they announced, say these on Facebook, I still had the tendency, even though I have studied grief and I have read more than 30 books on grief now since he's passed, and I've read many articles, and I've written an entire book on grief that was published with Routledge, and I've studied grief and all of that. And yet I still found myself saying, I want to say something like, I'm sorry for your loss, but I don't say that anymore. But the default is there to just say something that's kind of trite and that doesn't really connect with that person. In fact, it kind of excuses me from connecting with them because I'm uncomfortable and I don't want to make things worse. Interestingly, you'll be surprised to know this, is that when somebody's beloved dies, I would say 95% of the time, they want you to talk about that person and name them by name. So I think maybe Russ could even speak to this, like Russ, when I say, you must think of Connie every day. And you would, if I met you for coffee and I, as my colleague, I'd say, how are you and your wife, and are you thinking of Connie every day? And you would probably welcome that, right? You would probably welcome that.
Yes, one of the, just surprising on that thought that, I was at my local church and I said, guys, we want you to have the liberty to be able to come up to us and say, tell us about Connie, or are you thinking about Connie? We want it to be, it's okay for people to have that conversation with us. And that I think that's very true, that being able to ask, I'm sorry for your loss can be, we want people to mention that. I think that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank
so
you.
when you're, thank you, Russ. And when you're approaching somebody, they've gone through a loss or whatever it is, what's the worst thing that can happen? You can say, oh, my dear friend, the divorce must be very difficult, and say they break down into tears. Well, be prepared. Have your arms ready, have your Kleenex ready, all of that. So I invite vulnerability in these conversations. So, but what do we do for ourselves also when you are feeling a sense of loneliness? Maybe in the middle of the night, that's, I remember waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning and, thinking, okay, what now? What should I do now? I'm feeling quite horrible at times, or waking up weeping. Then what do you do for yourself? So the idea here, and we're going to do a small exercise, is that we can write, and writing is truly a companion. So it helps us take time to restore loss in ways that allow us to create meaning. discover parts of ourselves that are more creative and resilient than we thought. And we get comfortable with grief. And if we want, open the conversation with others about it. So loss is a reality, but grief is a learning process. And writing keeps us company. And the quote by my dear colleague, Katrine Denelson, who she and I are co-editing a book called Writing for Wellbeing right now. And she writes about her own widowhood journey. Not only was writing instrumental in my healing from trauma, it was also a key factor in my adaptation to grief and the rebuilding of my identity over the space of a decade. The sense of completion it brought has made it possible for me to experience more inner peace than I did prior to our life tragedy. So I'd like you to revisit your question and write it down again. Even though you've already written it down, has it changed a bit? Can you get even closer to what you want to ask? You know that game we play with children where we say warmer, warmer, colder, colder when we've hidden an object somewhere? So it's kind of like that. Can you get warmer, closer to the question that you really want to ask? So take a moment again with your paper and pen. So know that you can always come back to the paper and you can always ask a new question or one that emerges for you. So I'm assuming everyone has their question written, something that feels a little closer to the heart than maybe the original question, or maybe it's a more specific question. Instead of a general question like, how do I deal with this loss? Maybe more specific is, how do I get through the day? So I'd invite everyone just to close your eyes for a moment, just to sit back and close your eyes. And I want you to imagine that you are in a landscape that brings you peace. It might be a place that you regularly walk in. It might be a place that you've been once on holiday, or it might be an imagined place. And imagine you are on a path of some kind in this landscape that so appeals to you and that brings you a sense of peace. And then you'll notice somewhere there is an animal. Maybe it's a bird flying overhead. Maybe it's a creature that you hear rustling in the leaves close by. Maybe it's a large creature at the end of the path. So just to allow an image of an animal to emerge for you, something that you would meet along the way. Okay. So perhaps it was, like I say, a bird of some kind, or perhaps it was a leopard, or perhaps it was a wild swine, perhaps it was a small squirrel. Okay. With that animal image, we're going to do a writing exercise. So use the image that came up to go into dialogue with yourself about the question. So for instance, one of my questions in this widowhood journey was how, I want to know how to love again without being afraid. And my creature, actually, in fact, when I was thinking about preparing this presentation, and I was driving in the car on a call with my colleague in the Netherlands, a bald eagle flew over my car just when I was talking about how loss and career intersect. It was just an amazing moment. So the bald eagle is the animal that I chose. So just have a little back and forth, do some writing back and forth, ask your question, and let the animal be a voice to reply to you. I'm going to give you 2 minutes for this, at least 2 minutes. Don't worry about the time, just take the time and begin writing. And I'm just going to mute myself for a moment here. Okay. Some of you may be writing away, and you can revisit this at any time and continue the conversation. If anyone would like to put in the chat what happened for them in this exchange, I know we don't have the regular view, we have the webinar view, so I can't see you, but I can read the chat notes on the right-hand side. And one of the questions that came up here too is, well, anyway, I'll look at the chat. There was a question I wanted to address in the chat, but let's stay here for the moment. So as you dialogue back and forth, like this was my dialogue. So I want to know how to love again without being afraid. And the bald eagle cried, the great vision of life is that we will lose everyone we love and they will lose us. I notice you don't mention fear, I say as a reply. The bald eagle says, everything dies. And knowing that shows you how everything lives. Only in the contrast and embracing both sides can you love fully. And, you know, for me, this is not advice for anybody else, because when I wrote it, it gave me actually great comfort. And it was, it's almost like a Zen koan. It's something that I'm living to understand. Like I don't fully grasp what I've just written, but my words are actually wiser than I am. But it will take some time for this thing to integrate in me and become felt wisdom. So often our writing are in our dialogue with other parts of ourselves, and these totem animals, as someone has called them in the chat, allows us to tap into wisdom that we didn't know we had in creative ways. And it bypasses a sort of left brain rational way of thinking and allows us to work with creative images and metaphors that put words to our pain and bring us our own wisdom. So that's one of the things that writing really does, is it allows us to tap into our own wisdom. And I have, as an academic, I have theories of the psychological theories, of course, about how we can talk to ourselves. You know, I use the dialogical self theory from Hubert Hermans. He was actually a keynote speaker at the live, one of the live conferences that Deirdre put on several years ago. And, you know, and he speaks about this, that various voices can be the voices of resilience within ourselves. For instance, imagine you have recently lost a precious family member, and you would so much like to talk to them because they were so wise and supported you so well in life, and you just want to feel their love again. All you have to do is put on paper, "Hello, Grandma, I miss you. I miss you so. Can you please speak to me?" And Grandma will answer, because you have internalized her and she is a part of your dialogue internally. So know that those resources you were able to access those things. You know, Franz was an atheist. So I said to him, "Franz, when you die, does that mean I will lose you doubly? First of all, you'll be gone. And second of all, you're an atheist, so you don't believe you can talk to me anyway." And he said, "No." He says, "Oh no, sweetie." He says, "Just call and I'll be there." And it was such a wonderful, spontaneous moment. And I did, I held him to it. So anytime I really deeply miss Franz, I put on paper, "Dear Franz, where are you? Talk to me." And then I hear his reply in his jovial, exuberant voice, which moves me so to this day. So healing through writing is low stakes and low cost. It has therapeutic benefits. There's tremendous research on the therapeutic benefits of writing. Our most famous researcher in that is James Pennebaker. He's been cited really in all sorts of literature. He's been quoted by Bessel van der Kolk, trauma expert. He's been quoted by New Age writers like Deepak Chopra, and he is very well known in our field. Yeah, somebody says, "I currently talk to my parents, but hadn't thought of writing down what they have said." Yes, yes, and we really can access them and their wisdom. So writing is also a way of moving towards post-traumatic growth. And Russ, you again have said so beautifully. You've shown us what post-traumatic growth looks like. You know, you as you say, you're more a compassionate person. You've grown spiritually. You were able to open up a dialogue in your community about grief and loss. You were able to help other parents. So there's a tremendous growth that has come as a result of your willingness to open up to the learning process that grief is. Often, grief often becomes a gift we can share with others. Again, Russ, you know, the chair that you're developing is an example of this. And I've written a book about bereavement. I got feedback recently that a friend said, "I shared it with a widow friend of mine, and she's fine. She's gone on a trip for the first time in 7 years. She's been grieving. She's allowed herself this permission to be happy again, this permission to go and travel." And writing is a companion for life. So I invite you to see writing as a companion for life. It's a deep dialogue that we can have with ourselves. And unfortunately, in schools, we've been discouraged to believe that we are creative people. And I want to say something. When I say to you, "You can write a poem," you'll say, "No, that's for poets. That's for those creative types." If I said to you, "But you can write a shopping list," that means you can write a poem. So school, in a sense, has taken away some of our natural ability to thrive in difficulty, because we believe that our creative, unless we're brilliant and we immediately draw a wonderful picture, immediately able to create a beautiful poem, that somehow creativity is something for those creative people. And I will invite you to reconnect with the parts of you that are creative and have actually a lot more resilience. Like I say, even if you wrote a shopping list and it started with, "Today, I need paprika for the next recipe. I also need someone to call me and tell me it's okay that my love is gone and that I will be okay. I also need to buy paper towels so that I can clean up after I bake the cookies with the children. There are so many ways that you can write that doesn't have to be an approved poem, and that's the invitation here. We have created, with the British Journal of Guidance and Counseling, we've created a Living with Loss special issue, a journal with 8 or 9 scholarly peer-reviewed articles on grief and different ways of responding to grief. It was co-edited with Katrina Nelson, my Australian colleague, and Dr. Robert Niemeyer, with a grief colleague in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon. He runs the Portland Institute of Loss and Transition. And he has many courses on dealing with grief, including therapeutic writing modules that I have contributed to his institution. So there's more detailed ways that you can express and experience writing. So this is my contact information, my website, if you wanted to reach out. This is my book in the background here, you see, and it came out in last year. It came out about a year ago. It took me about a year to write, a year and a half to write and edit. And yeah, so, but I have many more resources, and I wanted to put that out to anyone who contacts Deirdre or contacts me through the website. If you are looking for particular grief resources, let me know, because I have read very many of them. I really made a study of grief. So yeah, in the gamut of grief research, they say some people are more expressive grievers, where we need to weep and cry and talk to people, and other people are more instrumental grievers, where they may do projects, as Russ has taken on a project, you know. But interestingly, as we mature through life, many of us land a little bit in the middle, meaning we do some expressing and some crying with people and talking with people, and we also make of our grief different kinds of projects. So that's kind of how we develop also as grievers over the lifespan. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Reinika. There's just so much in there, and I'm sure our audience will appreciate, you know, that you are a really, really strong woman who has actually managed to really, really dig into the theory that underpins many dimensions of loss and grief. And it's very generous of you to just, you know, offer, colleagues can contact you, they can visit your website. And what I love, Reinika, about you and your work is you're just so open, but also you're really practical, you know, around, I often think as a careers practitioner myself, I always imagine if I have someone in front of me, you know, as a result of this presentation, could I actually undertake a little exercise with them? Could I do something that would speak to them? And I think between you and Ross, you've actually both have given us lots and lots of very practical ways of dealing with this. I'm also very interested in whether our audience have got any fears and concerns themselves around, in practice, actually talking to someone about living with loss or grief. I'm just imagining, you know, that in the next year across Europe and further afield, there will be not just Ukrainian people, but other refugees, people displaced from their homelands. And just thinking about a career development process, how we can best support them. And just want to hear from the audience whether anyone has got any fears or anxieties, or are there any things that you would want to ask while we have Reinika and Russ here. So just give you a few minutes to have a think about that. I love the expression, we need to apprentice ourselves to loss. It's one of those things that you actually, you feel as though you've got to put on a brave face. And I know from my own experience, when my mother passed not long after my father had passed, in a work context, a rather insensitive manager said to me, "You've been off for 4 months, swanning over in Northern Ireland with your family, And I didn't take too kindly to that image of me swooning at a period of great loss, but I learned a lot from it, because I actually learned that actually, I had to adapt back into another world, where, I'm switching in between loss and, getting on with doing a job. So I'm just wondering, Carolyn Parry here is, we'll also pick up on Sally East, but Carolyn said, thanks for the interesting presentation. Do you have any advice or insights you could share in the context of anticipatory loss? One of my clients is a partner with a life-limiting condition. Who would like to take that? Russ or Reinika?
I'm happy to speak to that as well. I guess Russ and I both have had this experience of knowing that the end is coming, and what I say is I wrote during the period of Franz's illness as well, and I shared some of the writing with him as well. And so I spoke about that, and he was very open about speaking about death and dying, which really helped, a lot. I'm just going to briefly touch on Stephen's question here too, as it ties in, and then I'll let Russ also respond, of course, to this. I think the biggest concern is that we may upset someone by raising a sensitive subject. But I'll tell you from a griever's perspective, you may upset somebody by not speaking about it, because you're not acknowledging something that is deeply important to them, and you're sort of avoiding or jumping over. So sometimes the thing we're scared to say in a 3-minute conversation is a thing that can enhance a relationship for many years to come. Are you willing to take 3 minutes to be afraid to bring up a topic for the investment in a relationship over time?
Thanks, Reinika. I don't know whether I can't be seen, but as long as you guys can you hear me all right? I think for me, we were very fortunate that kind of from the get-go, really, we knew that our daughter was significantly unwell. So the conversation of the medics tell you that she might die, you might lose her, was very present. So I think we also had that sense of which the death was potentially anticipatory. I think, and then actually is helpful to begin to process it. So whilst I'm a Christian and I have a faith of future and resurrection, and there's a view of life beyond death, I'm still emotionally processing the potential loss. And I think, we couldn't necessarily dialogue directly with our daughter about that. We certainly dialogued with friends and family. And I think getting it on the table in conversation about that close of chapter, I think is an important one, and what that means for the relationship between the two parties present or others present. I mean, as I said, we were able to actually determine, the as and when for our daughter and bring all our family together and complete that end process. So we were very fortunate to be able to close that chapter really well. And I think the faith bit underpinned that for us. And I know people here present may have faith, may not have faith. So I can't comment about that for your own journeys, but I think being able to talk about it is important. And this idea that the taboo subject, we need to get it on the table that actually this is something we can talk about. I mean, there are certain, I don't know, Reinika, your experiences, but there are certain real practicalities of how am I going to do life when you're not here? You have to talk about those. And Reinika, did you feel that there was conversations you had to have with your husband about what we're going to do about various things?
Yes. I know, and I asked him, I said, Franz, do you have work advice for me? And he was a career expert, and he was a career, researcher and everything. And he said, follow your heart. You're strong and you'll know what to do, which is actually the most beautiful thing he could have said to me, because he could have given me so much detailed advice and he actually didn't, which left the space really open for So that was really, really, that was really wonderful. To trust yourself, right, is is such a profound thing. And also to know that you're connected socially, right? To reach out to the people that you need to reach out to. And it's interesting, you may get help from, I got help from a colleague, a career colleague, Roberta No, in Canada, and I had only known her just briefly at conferences, and she was able to say things to me because she'd lost her husband that were so much more helpful to me than some of my closest friends who meant well but didn't know what to say. So it's amazing where the help also comes from.
Yeah.
I'd say be open to, you know, you could be speaking with a nurse assistant who you've never met before, and she could say one profound sentence in the hallway of a hospital that actually nurtures you more than as somebody dear and near. And so I say, you know, be open. I just see another question about the, there's a question here I want to jump to, and it's been asked twice. So why is death so taboo in the West? Well, I want to say two things about that. One is because we've gotten so good at medical care, we want to prevent death. So our culture is prevent death, prevent death, prevent death. And we've gotten so good at it, right? With all sorts of vaccinations, operations, research, that's fantastic. And so we become death averse because we have less death to deal with, less childhood death and all of that to deal with. But the other thing is that we assume in the West that we're more death averse, but other cultures have other taboos around death as well. For instance, there's some cultures in the South Pacific where if somebody has died, you must keep smiling and laughing because otherwise you might attract the wrong kinds of spirits. So they also have fears and taboos around death. So I don't think we could say that it's only a Western problem. I think it's a human problem because we're all really fearful of death on one level or another, you know, and we can only hope to apprentice ourselves enough through life to loss that we can meet our death with equanimity. And I think that's what part of what Franz taught me is how to meet death with equanimity. You know,
I think also, Randika, that also reminds us of cultural differences, you know, East and West perspectives, certainly in a career development context, the rituals that surround family, that surround faith, that surround really how people live their lives. It's, I think, really important that we do as practitioners learn more about this subject and that we practice different ways and respect different ways that individuals might have rituals around loss. I know we have quite a few people here from India in this webinar, so do feel free in the chat facility, do share with us anything that jumps out, or indeed from any other part of the world. I want to sort of come on to at some point this notion of boundaries, because I think if you are a natural writer and you love writing, it's easier than maybe if you're not. And it's fabulous. So you gave us that real practical tip. I'm going to think about that shopping list approach. So I think really one of the things I'd like to explore with you and Ross on behalf of the group is boundaries and referring to others. Like, at what point is that appropriate? And I know it will vary from individual to individual, but any helpful techniques or thoughts? Because the worst thing would be to be living with loss and somebody trying to refer you on to yet somebody else when all you want to do is have a listening ear and get some practical support.
Yes, you know, I say this, if we can tune into our bodies and our emotions, we'll probably know what to do. Because when we tune into a body, we have the mirror neurons, right? So if I'm sitting across from Russ and I see my mirror neurons and I'm looking to his eyes and he's told me a little bit about his daughter, I know that I can speak about Connie. I can say to you, Russ, you know, I'm really moved by what you've said about Connie, and I'm thank you for sharing that today. And then we can speak about it, and he'll say maybe perhaps something about Franz, because we have opened that dialogue. Whereas if somebody new came to me and I felt that they were more introverted perhaps, and they were more quiet, if I tuned into my body and just looked at the facial expressions and moved my face, even on a Zoom call or whatever, if I mirrored and felt in my body, I would probably say less. And I would say, so how are you today? How are things today? Do you feel any tension in your body? Is there anything else you'd like to tell me? You know, and then you can invite that in safe space. So if we're in tune with ourselves and our bodies, we're more likely to do the right thing and say the right thing, because it's always a tailor-made solution. Just like we know in career guidance, with the way that the world is, every solution is a tailor-made solution now. And so that's the same way that we should deal with grief. It's a tailor-made solution based on how we actually interact and feel, and we must be in tune with ourselves. That's the core piece.
Well, as Caroline says here, you know, we need to feel, we certainly need to feel more and have that space and time for reflection to look after ourselves as well as our clients. Ross, before we sort of switch back into just a few more slides, just any further thoughts on that around boundaries and referrals?
I can only speak from experience. I mean, I think if you create a safe space and have the empathy skills to be present with people, then people will dialogue as they feel they need to. I just was thinking of a gentleman very recently doing some career guidance with who almost lost his son from a road traffic accident, and I shared it obviously in a little training session we did early, and it was a grieving process for him because of the current experience of loss of his current son's capacity because of the damage caused by the traffic accident and the associated loss of his own career where he was made redundant from. And it was profoundly about a grieving process that he was going through, and he was just able to unpack that emotionally with me. And whilst, you know, I'm not a you know, a bereavement counselor per se, being present and being the empathetic participatory to that conversation, I think was a crucial breakthrough for him about resolving the underlying reasons why he fundamentally wasn't motivated to go and find work 4 years after his job ended. And he was a city banker. You know, this isn't somebody that's just lazed around for his career. He's had a proper career, and he was in this impasse, and it's just this conversation. So I think that's the power of the guidance process, being able to walk and journey alongside people through the things that they raise. And I think, you know, this training like this enables us all, empowers us all to not be frightened of the conversation. And we've talked about this with about death. It's like this challenge of the taboo, but also about, you know, it's okay to have some of that conversation with people when they raise it, you know, and grief does impact us on our own personal lives, but also it can reframe us about what we want to do for the future. And that's a great guidance process for people to get involved with. And you know, let's not miss the opportunity that people like somebody like myself, who maybe is more an activist, wants to talk the grief through, because there's potentially something hopeful in the future for them.
Well, I think we can just see from the chat here, you know, how beneficial this has been for all of us, myself included. And what I love really from this session is this sort of reminder that actually in a career development context, people are coping with loss at all sorts of levels. And I think, you know, between the two of you, you've really covered almost every base. Let's just have a quick look at a poll now and see how we're all feeling. And then I want to just share a few slides, and then we'll finish with Ross just sort of bringing to an end the webinar. So same questions as we had at the very, very beginning. I'm inviting you now to just reflect on what you've learned really as a result of coming to this session. Have things changed? We're certainly seeing a higher score coming through here in terms of new resources and responses. Again, I'll give Mark just a minute or two to then just share, Mark, the final poll results. And please do put into the chat facility any other things that you feel that you've learned that maybe you'd like to share with us. I have been sort of keeping a watch on the question and answer facility, and there are no questions, but I think they've all been put into the chat. So fantastic. And I think just in the next sort of 10 minutes maximum, we'll finish bang on time, if not slightly earlier, really. Just feel free to get the most out of this session. Don't be afraid to ask any questions or things that maybe we haven't covered. And if you're a student, maybe you're a student now coming into this career development field, I hope that this has given you confidence as a student to actually practice and try out different things. And those people like us who are highly, I say highly experienced, I mean older than maybe some of our younger students, more mature, really, we're still learning. So don't be afraid of trying out any of this. So thank you, Mark, for sharing that. We can see from that poll, really, that hopefully we've helped meet the needs of individuals who've come to this session. So let's go into the final home straight now. Just invite Mark to share our slides with you. We've just got a few more slides just to give you an information update, but also just to make sure that you know how you can maybe benefit from more of our CPD that we've got on offer. This slide looks dreadful, doesn't it, on the screen? It's got lots of words and lots of links, but it's really just to give you a flavour of DMH Associates and what we've been up to. On Friday last week, the Minister for the Economy in Northern Ireland launched a report which we led on, looking at the National All-Age Careers Service in Northern Ireland. You might like to have a look at that because we put in a few new ideas which we hope the careers community might welcome. We've got a book chapters just come out in a Cedefop publication. If you're interested in this, Reinika touched on the savings to government if we can attend more to these issues of supporting individuals with their loss. Chris Percy and I have written an article on return on investment based on a model in Wales. There's a formal review of quality standards taking place in England, and a couple of reports there. And I wanted just to draw your attention to CC the Careers Chatbot project that I've the pleasure of leading on with 3 other co-directors. If you want to see CC in action, then just click on that link and you'll receive this after the presentation. And if you want a full demo, I'm really excited to show you the latest version. So very quickly, our next slide, Mark, please. We have now got an April webinar plan, so save the date in your diary. It's really focusing on higher education, evidence and impact. And I'm delighted that we'll be joined from a colleague from Dublin, a colleague from Huddersfield in England, and a colleague from Coventry University of Warwick. So I hope you can join us for that. If you're someone from an organisation that would like to sponsor that session, that would be really wonderful. For the first 2 years, we've wholly sponsored these, and Russ stepped up to the plate in kindly sponsoring today. So thank you once again, Russ. Another just slide to share with you. This is a really exciting development. Save the date for your diary, the 6th to the 8th of July. We have an action-packed international conference. It'll be virtual. It's called Career Development. Be bold, be brave. And these are the links for you if you would like to register. There's an early bird registration. And now I'd like to just hand over to Ross, Ross will just talk you through a few of his slides now about the other things that Ross does in his life. And really just from me, a very big thank you. So over to you, Ross, and then we'll bring it to a close in just a few minutes. You're just on mute, Ross.
Thank you, Deirdre. Just a few minutes just to talk about the products that we produce. And again, thank you, Deirdre, and the DMH team for having me here today. So effectively, my background is working in career infographics, and we've been producing career infographics for a number of years. We do digital print media, and our popular product is the Career Guidance Charts volume. This is effectively a mind map of careers for young people and adults to explore job ideas, and they literally are just mind maps. And our current volume has about 100 of these based on subject and vocational areas. We also produce a range of job guides that are available as digital downloads or as prints. A range of posters that are infographics. I think our publication range is probably over 180 units. So I've just given you an idea there. We produce a whole range of banners. I know my name is Banner by surname, so there's a slight joke in that I've heard from one or two people about how did I get into banners, but somehow we got into creating roller banners, which some include posters, some include quizzes. A lot of them are bespoke to schools and employment agencies or colleges that want them. Poster collection is very broad, covers some vocational subject areas, covers career ready project areas as well. All kinds of content there that are available to you if you work in this field. We also have a digital magazine called the CE ebook and a big names publication, which covers a number of businesses that that we kind of demonstrate. For example, what are the major companies that work in the construction field? So we kind of name them so young people get an insight into particular companies that work in that industry sector. And we're currently in development of an app, and this will combine all of our content into a single online resource, and that will be coming out fairly soon. The current content has 88 charts in it, with over 580 major companies listed. So that's something that's coming out soon for our business. Content will include some quizzes, job guides, labour market information, or a unique online package. So that's very quick brief about my business. Please do have a look at the store. It's careerguidancecharts.com, or if you are an American customer, you can go to usa.careerguidancecharts.com. That's our US base. We're on Amazon and Amazon UK. So there are orders you can make from there, but obviously come to us direct if you want better discounts, and do look at our mailing list and consider finding out more about the resource collection. And thanks for your time. Thanks, Deirdre. That's that. In a whistle.
Thank you, everyone. And
2 minutes early.
I have to say, just the feedback that we have in the chat facility. Thank you so much to our two absolutely brilliant speakers. Someone described this as a beautiful session. I think that's such a lovely way to sort of convey the sense of how this has touched the colleagues who have joined us. And I think because Franz was my friend, and as Reinika knows, I miss him dearly. But let's end on that high note, because if Franz was here with us, and I'm sure he's looking down on us, let's end on that note of life is for living, folks. So let's live our life as best we can. And just remember that in terms of your work that you do, it makes such a difference to people's lives. And if you're someone who maybe doesn't like your job at the minute, or feels a bit stressed, or is a bit fed up, just remember that your work makes a difference to people's lives, and stay focused on the good parts of it. And don't worry too much about the bad parts. I'm sure that as you begin to write down your thoughts and your feelings, you'll find a way of actually bringing about some change for yourself. So thank you very much, wherever you are in the world. Either sleep well now if you're going to bed, or have some tea and enjoy it, or maybe have your breakfast with a nice cup of coffee. Wherever you are, take good care, and thank you so much once again. Bye-bye.